Hi, St. James parishioners. This is Mother Storm here on weeks, I think, 8 and 9. I'm 1 week behind of the Bible study. We're reading 3 chapters a day of the Bible, Genesis to Revelation, and these videos are primarily for those who aren't able to make the Sunday morning discussions, and I summarize in these videos what we talked about. So I hope many of you are still with us out there and following along, even though I don't see you week to week. So we're talking about Joshua and Judges today. We finished the book of Deuteronomy and finished the book of Joshua, and we're now beginning the book of Judges. Now, these works from Deuteronomy through, oh my gosh, 2 Samuel, maybe Kings, are the work of the 2 Kings. They're the work of the author, the Deuteronomist. And so we have, as I said last time, a new authorial hand here. You can tell the style is different, the emphases are different. The Deuteronomist is very concerned with obedience to God, lest they lose the land. The Deuteronomist is concerned with the centralization of the cult, the temple, one temple in Jerusalem, not scattered about, and we'll see that more in the weeks ahead. The Deuteronomist has Moses as a very central mediating figure between God and the people. So we talked about some of those themes, and we also talked about how now that we're into Joshua and beyond, Christians and Jews sort of they're in the same order, but we classify these differently. So in the Jewish tradition, these books are called the former prophets, and then the latter prophets are the ones who come after this with names in our Bible. So it's the former prophets and the latter prophets, and now we're in the former prophets. In the Christian tradition, we call these the historical books. So Joshua, Judges, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, these are historical books in our classification of it. But the order thus far is still the same. Joshua. So Joshua tells the story of the conquest of the land. And you'll notice that there are conflicting accounts of how successful and quick that conquest was. We've talked about very frequently about how the Bible consists of many different threads, ideas, woven together into one, but not necessarily harmonized. And you very much see that here, where in some passages in Joshua, it sounds like they just walked in and conquered the whole land. And in other passages in Joshua and to come Judges, it'll point out that, oh, well, the Canaanites were still in this town, and they still had hold of this town and that town, and they still lived among, and everybody was intermingled. So you have what's called sort of a maximalist view that historically what happened is Joshua and the Israelites crossed the Jordan and just wiped everybody out all through the land and took it for themselves. And then the minimalist view, which has different iterations, but one of which is that it was a gradual taking over of the land, and really not even complete, because they continued to live among the people who were there in the land when they got there. We talked about the book of, we talked about the tribes, and we looked at a map in Christine Hayes' book accompanying her lecture series, her Yale lecture series, and so we could see where all the different tribes were that are being described in the last part of Joshua. And then we got into the book of Judges. Now, another thing the Deuteronomist tries to do is make it very clear that there was a need for a king. Israel was so broken, things had become such a disaster, so disastrous, that they had no choice but to have a king. Getting a king is really not a victory in these stories, and we'll see that in the weeks ahead. But there was no other way by which, in the Deuteronomist view, Israel could be governed and stable. And so we'll see through the book of Judges a system that didn't work. In fact, by the end of Judges, turns out to be extremely broken as the tribes begin to turn on each other and enact heinous violence against each other. So Judges is really one of the hardest books, and we discussed this in our class. Very hard to read. All of this violence and bloodshed, very often in the name of God. happening, and we grappled with what it means for this to be part of our Bible. Again, as I said last time, Christians coming to the Old Testament, we always struggle with the depiction of God. Jews coming to the Old Testament come with it with a whole different lens, set of interpretive guides and strategies. But to us, it's just the contrast for us between what we think the New Testament God represents and the Old Testament God represents, especially in Judges, is just stark, and it just has to be commented on. So, and we did. We talked about that. So in the coming week, we're going to be reading Judges. And next Sunday, we'll gather in the ISOM room, and we'll continue our discussion. This is still the hand of the Deuteronomist author or authors. So we're going to see a lot of these same themes continuing. And ultimately, we're going to lead to the kingship of Israel in 1st and 2nd Samuel, some of the best stories ever. And I'll talk about that later next week. Be well. Thanks for listening. Bye. Join us in the ISOM room, 9:45, November 30.